Let's talk survival sci-fi. This is going to be my million-view video. I can feel it. I've chosen the most popular YouTube topic, a critical meta-analysis of a minor subgenre. Woo! Okay, well, let's start by talking about the genres to either side of survival so that we have a little context. One genre is military sci-fi. I would hesitate to call this a subgenre. It's more like the genre. In military sci-fi, you play as whoever the perfect person for the job is. You play as military Rambo Action Man 496, and your job is to kill the annoying aliens until they stop being annoying. You are explicitly here to restore the status quo from all of these annoying aliens by murdering them. You may play a spaceship instead of a man, but the basic concept is still the same. You are the baddest dude around. You are the perfect person for the job. No one is better equipped than you to kill all of these aliens. That is a simple escapism. Most escapist fantasies are like this. Superhero movies are exactly like this. The point is to restore the status quo and prove that you are the burliest bad dude around. Problem is, this isn't really sci-fi. It uses sci-fi trappings, but it doesn't engage with them in any sort of meaningful sense. If you play Master Chief, you're going to encounter a lot of cool sci-fi concepts like deep time, and AI, and the Fermi paradox, and parasitic organisms, and even the most powerful sci-fi concept, cosplaying as a Klingon. You're going to encounter all of these, but you're not going to engage with them. They exist to give you a target-rich environment and make you look good. Master Chief does not care about deep time or AI or Fermi paradoxes or parasitic organisms. It just rolls off his back because the only thing he cares about is murdering enough people to get the status quo back. Everything else is completely unimportant. We could take Master Chief and put him in any setting, and then we could easily replace all of these cool concepts with cool concepts from that setting. Put Master Chief in the desert, and now his companion is a ghost rather than an AI. Put Master Chief in Elfland, and now his companion is a bird with tits. All of these things are just background elements to the Master Chief, because the Master Chief is not interested in any of that. It's just like superhero stories. The superheroes do not grow and change. They do not face things they cannot deal with. They are the right person for the job. Sure, the job might be tough, but no one could possibly do it better than them. They are the ideal person, to a very disturbing degree, to be honest. But let's look at an actual sci-fi subgenre. On the other side of survival, we have introspective sci-fi. Introspective sci-fi really hits all the same basic points with things like deep time and AI and Fermi paradoxes and parasitic organisms and all that. But instead of simply building a backdrop for you to stomp across, you have to actually deal with it. These concepts are overwhelming. They are far larger than any human could possibly be. Your mind can only barely grapple with one tiny edge of what this crap is. And your body certainly can't ignore it either. You're going to have to work. You're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to struggle. You're going to have to change. That is the point of introspective sci-fi. As an easy example, In Other Waters, if you haven't played it, go play it. It's a short little sci-fi game where you go to a faraway planet in search of someone, and you find all of these sci-fi concepts in the form of the aliens that you meet on that world. But no number of murders will give you back your status quo. You cannot restore the status quo because the status quo was never threatened. This is the status quo. The universe is the status quo. Your tiny human life is insignificant. Maybe you had 5 good years and then someone left you or someone died. You can't restore that status quo. Time has moved on. The universe has moved on. The universe has taken things away from you and has remorselessly proceeded. Your status quo can never be restored because it is transient. You are a tiny little organism on the vast sea of the cosmos. And what this means is that all of these sci-fi concepts are, whether on purpose or on accident, stand-ins for things that actually happen to us as humans. all of the things that we struggle with as humans, we can make the universe about them. And then we can say, look, this is how I feel. This is how big this topic is. Sure, you might blow it off if I were to explain it to you, day to day. Oh, my wife left me 3 years ago. And, your friend would be like, oh, that's pretty bad, man. But on the other hand, if you're like, my wife stepped into a swirling vortex of time and vanished, and I have dedicated my life to finding out where she went. That's basically the same emotional conversation, but you can really put it on display a lot more powerfully if you make it the universe rather than just something you're saying. That's the power of sci-fi. You can take these things and you can make the entire universe that thing so that people can really understand how powerful it feels. And you can do it without being preachy. Now, obviously, there are plenty of sci-fi, stories that are preachy, but you don't have to be. For example, in Other Waters, the parasitic organism is very obviously a stand-in for cancer, like real-world cancer. But it's not done in a preachy way. You don't go, oh my gosh, this is the most blatant way of coping with cancer that I've ever seen. No, you buy into the story. You buy into the fact that this is happening to someone. This is how big it is. This is how big it feels. And it lets you grapple with that concept at the right scale. It doesn't feel preachy. It doesn't feel forced. And if you're not looking for it, you might not even notice the parallel, but you'll feel it. And that's the power of introspective sci-fi. We use these sci-fi concepts to help us explore what it means to be human at a scale that acknowledges how we feel about these things. Like if you use the concept of deep time, time passes. Life is short. You can explore what that means by making the entire universe about that. If you want to explore race relations, you might use AI to give a scale for just how big it feels and how locked down you feel as a tool being exploited because of who you were born. How you were born. The Fermi paradox. If you're feeling lonely, nothing better than the Fermi paradox to make it very clear how lonely you feel. This is a very powerful setup to me. We can't restore the status quo because our life is too short to have a status quo. Our life is too small to force anything to happen. And that leads us to the point of these stories. In military sci-fi, you almost always play the biggest, baddest dude around, the perfect choice. Whether it's a person or a spaceship, there is nobody around who could do the job better than you. You are the perfect man for the job of killing all of those aliens. In introspective sci-fi, you usually play someone who can't cope with whatever's going on and is just some dude or some lady. The whole point is that if you're going to have a character arc, your character needs to have something that challenges them in a way that isn't directly along the vector they already exist. Sure, Master Chief will struggle to overcome these hard odds, and at the end he might be a little bit older and a little bit more scarred, but nobody else could have done it better than him, and he won't fundamentally change. He is the perfect man for the job. On the other hand, in introspective sci-fi, you aren't the perfect man for the job. You suck at your job, whatever that happens to be, because the point is that you are going to be forced to change. You're going to have to reckon with these overwhelming universal constants that you can't face. No matter how good you are at your job, it's not going to help, right? Now, you can be very good at a job. Like, there are actually some introspective sci-fi shows that start you off, or have the main character be some kind of buff military dude with all of the, training and stuff, and just the perfect man for killing aliens. And then you quickly find out that killing aliens is completely useless. You're not the right person for the job because the job isn't killing aliens, it's coping with stuff you cannot possibly resist. In military sci-fi, you are the right person to force reality to do what you want. In introspective sci-fi, you are going to have to deal with the fact that reality doesn't care what you want and can't be forced to do anything. So, what about survival sci-fi? This is a little more complicated because what are you doing in a survival sci-fi game? Whether it's survival horror or survival crafting, the player is responsible for all of the actual actions, right? Not the character, the player. In military sci-fi, the player does shoot a bunch of dudes, but the character is still responsible for taking mission briefings and deciding where to go and observing things and talking about objectives and stuff like that. In introspective sci-fi, the character is usually responsible for almost everything, and the player just walks them through their story, sometimes making choices or paying attention to different things, but fundamentally, the character is still doing all of the actual work. But in survival sci-fi, in a video game anyway, the player does the work. The player is the one who is surviving. The player is the one who zaps down a tree with the laser axe or whatever to craft sci-fi wood. Or the player is the one that hides from the xenomonster that's coming to eat you. The player does all of these things, not the character. So if the character isn't the one facing these challenges, how can the character grow? How can the character have an arc? How can the character struggle? The player is the one experiencing these things quite directly. And this is why most survival games, whether they're survival horror or survival crafting, have a fairly faceless character, a character that doesn't really have a personality or a story to tell. But I think it's important to note that that doesn't mean the character doesn't exist. What the character is capable of determines what the player is capable of, and those capabilities can form arcs. An easy example of this would be Alien, right? Alien and Aliens. Ripley is not, a super trained, muscle-bound military person who can do everything with no problem. She's just some lady, and she just works on a spaceship. She doesn't have any of the overwhelming power that you would need to actually kill aliens. And that was the joy of those movies. You've got all of these Marines and all these tough guys, and they get killed. But Ripley manages to survive. And the same is true of most of their survivals. Newt. Newt isn't the right person to survive. She survives because she manages to hide, and she manages to stay away from where the aliens are. But she's not really overwhelming the aliens. She's not really capable of shooting them. She's just some little girl. And that means that you really feel for her plight. These characters are not the right people for the job. But they have to do it anyway. They're kind of stuck doing it. That's the point. And the same is true if you're doing a survival crafting game, right? Or a survival horror game. Whatever you might want to call it. If you look at the main character of your survival crafting prospect, you're looking at a new game, you're trying to decide whether to play, what does their main character do? What does their main character have? How does it feel? How does it work? One of the things you're likely to find is that about 3/4 of them, the main character is military muscles man make muscles. And you're like, oh yeah, he's going to have a real hard time surviving in this alien world, isn't he? It's like, he is literally the person that can survive easiest. Sure, he might struggle, but there is nobody that would do it better. You are the perfect man for the job. You're big and strong and healthy, and you have all of that military training and an encyclopedic knowledge of how to turn trees into spears and then spears into nuclear reactors. No one could do it better than you. And I'm thinking just how boring that is. How boring is it to be the right person for the job? How boring is it to skate through these challenges without ever having to change or think about things or deal with whatever you're trying to deal with? But you can have other kinds of characters, and there are survival games that have characters that aren't the best at surviving, and that's the point. And the things they bring to the table are the powers that the player has to use in the universe. How do you survive? Well, if you're this guy, you take out your laser axe, you cut a tree, you turn it into, a house, and then you go out and you kill some monsters and you turn them into a nuclear reactor, and Bob's your uncle. But if you were to play as a child, or a scientist whose physical capabilities are not very good, or as a sports star who is very stupid, all of those things change how you're going to interact with the world you're trying to survive on. They're going to give you different ways to interact with things, and they're going to make you understand the world in different ways. How your character interprets the world as you move through it is a critical feature. If you are playing as a dumb oaf who's just got the muscles, then you, the player, will giggle when the dumb oaf misunderstands something or misinterprets it in a funny way. You'll understand that that's, actually a nuclear reactor or whatever. But you're also going to really understand this character. You're going to understand their story and their struggle to survive. And the same is true of more exotic characters. Play as a psychic. Your psychic powers will allow you to do things in a specific way and understand things in a specific way, which can in turn create an arc. As you play the game, you will start to understand what your psychic powers mean for you. You're not just surviving on this world. The survival is the daily struggle that you go through. And how is that going to reflect on you with your own specific take on the universe? But most survival crafting or survival horror games do not do that. They do not care about having an arc or an interesting story or using their sci-fi elements. They are basically just, you play as Muscles Guy, and your job is to make enough civilization that you can restore the status quo. You are here to make a comfortable life for yourself because that is the status quo. There's a whole bunch of things in your way from having a comfortable life. How dare they kill them and turn them into nuclear reactors? It's essentially the same as military sci-fi, except that half of your work involves building things instead of destroying things, which is better, admittedly. But it's still not very interesting because you're too good at your job. You are the right person for this task, and you will never change, you will never grow, you will never have an interesting opinion. That's my problem with survival sci-fi. People who make survival sci-fi games as escapist fantasy are really missing out on the power that sci-fi has. All of those sci-fi things that you put into your setting, they're not just window dressing. They allow you to connect to the human experience. They give you an opportunity to tell a story. And it doesn't even have to be an interesting story or a good story. It just has to be a story. You just have to allow the character to actually grapple with anything. Well, maybe we can talk about that more some other time. For now, however, I think this is more than enough. See you around.